There was a time when I believed love was unshakable, that when two people made a promise to stay together, it truly meant something. It stood for commitment, trust, and sacrifice. I clung to that belief for a decade, 10 long years of marriage to the woman I was certain would remain by my side for the rest of my life. But I was wrong. I should have noticed the warning signs sooner, but love has a way of clouding judgment. It makes you overlook the subtle clues, the sudden disappearances, the vacant expressions, the forced laughter that only seemed genuine when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her name is Jennifer, and for years, she was the center of my world. But now, she stood in the dim glow of our living room, a suitcase at her feet, her fingers clutching her phone like it was the only thing anchoring her. Her lips parted slightly, as if searching for the right words, but I already knew what was coming. I had seen it in her eyes for weeks. What she didn't expect was that I was ready for this moment. Go ahead, Jennifer. Walk out that door. But once you do, there's no coming back. Her eyes flickered, not in shock, but irritation. James, she sighed, her tone dripping with the condescension I had grown accustomed to over the past year. You're being dramatic. Dramatic. That was always her response. Every time I asked why she had suddenly started dressing up more for work events. Every time she turned off her phone screen the second I walked into the room. Every time she came home later and later, offering vague excuses. She made me feel like I was imagining things, like I was the problem. But I wasn't blind. I had seen the subtle shift, the secretive text she thought I didn't notice, the way she smiled at her phone before quickly locking it when I got too close. And the worst part? I had done nothing. I sat by and let it happen, too afraid to acknowledge the truth, too terrified to face what I already knew in my gut. But now, there was no more pretending. You don't get to do this, I said, my voice firm and steady. You don't get to act like this is just another argument. You made your decision, Jennifer. You've been making it for months. I'm just finally catching up. She averted her gaze, and in that moment, I understood everything. If there had been even a sliver of remorse, she would have met my eyes. But she didn't. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her bag and let out a quiet sigh. I never wanted to hurt you, she murmured. A bitter laugh escaped me. That's a lie, and we both know it. She flinched at my words, but I no longer cared. Tell me, Jennifer, I continued, stepping closer. What was the plan? Were you going to keep sneaking around? Try to juggle both of us until you got tired of it? Or was this always your goal, to make a fool out of me? That's not fair. I let out a sharp breath. Fair? You really want to talk about fairness? I spent the last 10 years building a life with you. I gave you everything, and you threw it away like it meant nothing. Silence settled between us, heavy and suffocating. And then, finally, she spoke the words that shattered whatever was left of my heart. He loves me, James. The air left my lungs as if I had been punched. I had suspected it, but hearing it aloud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I had unknowingly braced myself for this moment for months, and now that it was here, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Then go to him, I said simply. But don't come back when it all falls apart. A flicker of uncertainty passed through her eyes, hesitation tugging at the edges of her expression. But it wasn't enough. Without another word, she turned toward the door. Her fingers wrapped around the knob, and just like that, Jennifer walked out of my life. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing through the house with a finality I hadn't expected. I stood motionless, staring at the door, waiting for some part of me to break, for the weight of it all to crush me. I thought this was the end of my story. But the truth? It was just the beginning. I remained frozen in place, my eyes lingering on the closed door as if she might change her mind and walk back through it. But I wasn't that naive. Not anymore. She had made her choice, and now I had to live with mine. For a long time, I didn't move. The weight of a decade pressed down on me, suffocating, inescapable. The living room, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt hollow, like a museum of a life that no longer belonged to me. The framed photos on the walls, the couch where we had spent countless movie nights, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to the air, all of it felt like ghosts of something already gone, whispering reminders of a love that had crumbled long before tonight. Eventually, my body moved on its own. I drifted through the house, my fingers brushing against furniture, countertops, anything to ground myself in the reality of her absence. How could someone be here one moment and gone the next? How could something we had spent years building collapse so effortlessly? I found myself standing in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the mess we had left behind that morning. The bed was still unmade, the sheets tangled. Her side of the closet was half empty, an open suitcase lying on the floor. She must have packed her things while I was away at work, assuming I wouldn't notice. Perhaps she believed she could slip away unnoticed, without facing any repercussions. My gaze fell upon her nightstand, where small remnants of her presence lingered, a half-full glass of water, the book she had been reading, a pair of earrings she had removed the night before. The room felt frozen in time, as if she had only stepped out for a brief moment and would return at any second. But I knew she wouldn't. Lowering myself onto the edge of the bed, I let my thoughts spin in circles. The full force of my anger hadn't hit me yet. Instead, a hollow emptiness settled inside me, though it didn't last for long. My phone buzzed from the dresser. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe it was her. Maybe she had reconsidered. But as soon as I picked it up, that hope crumbled. A message. From an unfamiliar number. She's with me now. Let her go. I stared at the words, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't hard to figure out who had sent it. Him. The man she had chosen over me. A slow burn spread through my chest, more than just anger. Something raw, something bitter and consuming. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. The audacity. How dare he? How dare he send me this message, as if I were some helpless fool who needed permission to move on. I forced a steady breath and typed out a reply. I already did. Hitting send, I tossed the phone onto the bed. My hands trembled, but no longer from sadness. Now it was rage. This wasn't just about Jennifer leaving. It was about how she had left. The lies, the betrayal, the sheer nerve of thinking she could just vanish into someone else's life without a second thought. I had spent months second-guessing myself, wondering if I was just imagining things, doubting my instincts. But now, I saw everything clearly. And with that clarity came a realization. I wasn't the weak one here. She was. I had been strong enough to build something real, something solid. She, on the other hand, had thrown it all away for something fleeting, something easy, something that wouldn't last. I stood abruptly, my pulse pounding in my ears. Staying in this house, even for another minute, felt unbearable. The walls, the furniture, the scent of her perfume still clinging to the sheets. It was suffocating. I grabbed my keys and left, with no destination in mind, only the need to escape. I needed to breathe air that wasn't tainted by memories of someone who had already erased me from her life. Outside, the night was cold, the streets eerily silent. I drove without direction, the hum of the engine steady beneath my hands. The empty road stretched ahead like a vast, endless abyss, the neon lights of the city blurring into streaks of color on the wet pavement. But I barely registered any of it. My thoughts were a storm, memories, regrets, unspoken words clashing violently inside my mind. I had nowhere to go. Not really. The house was no longer a home, just a structure filled with echoes of a woman who had deceived me for who knows how long. Had she ever truly loved me? Or had I merely been a convenient stepping stone in her life? Eventually, I pulled into a small, all-night diner, an old, greasy spot I hadn't set foot in for years. Jennifer had always looked down on places like this, dismissing them as low class. She preferred rooftop restaurants and exclusive lounges where she could sip expensive wine and pretend she was someone more important than she actually was. Maybe that should have been a warning sign from the beginning. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The air smelled of fried food and stale coffee. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, a waitress topped off someone's cup, and in a corner booth, a man stared blankly at a newspaper as if the words meant nothing to him. I slid into a booth, rubbing my hands over my face. The weight of it all settled heavily on me. This was my reality now, alone, starting over, with nothing but shattered trust and unanswered questions in my wake. A woman in her late 50s, with tired eyes but a warm smile, approached with a coffee pot in hand. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice gentle, as if she had seen too many men sit in this exact spot, wearing the same expression of exhaustion. "You could say that," I murmured. She poured the coffee, without pressing for more. Maybe she knew better than to ask. Instead, she slid a menu in front of me and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. A vibration in my pocket pulled me from my spiraling mind. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But eventually, I pulled the phone out. It wasn't Jennifer. It was Robert. I hesitated, then answered. Yeah. Man, what the hell happened? His voice was thick with concern, the background noise of a bar humming behind him. I just got home and saw Jennifer's post. She made it seem like you were some kind of psycho who threw her out in the middle of the night. My grip tightened around the phone, my jaw clenching. She posted about it? Oh yeah, he said bitterly. Judging by the flood of comments, she was already crafting her narrative, the poor, abandoned wife left with no choice but to walk away. And, of course, people were eating it up. I should have known Jennifer wouldn't just leave quietly. That wasn't her style. She needed an audience, a group of sympathetic voices assuring her she was in the right, that she had been left with no option but to escape from her overly controlling and paranoid husband. I inhaled deeply, steadying my voice. Let me guess, she conveniently left out the part where she'd been sneaking around with someone else for months? Robert let out a short laugh. Nope. Just that she had to leave for her own well-being, and that you wouldn't understand. He hesitated before adding, and the real kicker? She tagged herself at some hotel. A hollow feeling settled in my stomach. I didn't need to ask who she was there with. My jaw tightened. Good for her. Robert paused, sensing the shift in my tone. Look, man, don't go reading the comments. It's just gonna make you angrier. Too late. My fingers were already navigating to her profile, scrolling through the endless wave of support flooding in. You're so strong, Jennifer. Stay safe. You deserve better. He never appreciated you. If you need a place to stay, girl, I got you. Disgust churned in my gut. She had played her role perfectly, twisting reality just enough to ensure she emerged as the victim. And the worst part? I knew that if I tried to defend myself, I'd only come off looking worse. That was her talent, bending the truth just enough to make sure she always landed on top. Robert sighed. So, what are you gonna do? I stared down at my coffee, its dark surface rippling as I exhaled. What did I want to do? A part of me itched to drive straight to that hotel, to come face to face with the man she had chosen over me, to warn him exactly what kind of person he was dealing with. But what good would that do? Nothing. If anything, it would only prove her point, solidifying the image she was painting of me as the obsessive, unstable ex. No. If Jennifer wanted to rewrite our past, I wouldn't stop her. But I wasn't going to let her do it without a challenge. I'll handle this my way, I said at last. Robert hesitated. James, don't do anything reckless. A dry chuckle escaped me. I won't. But she's not the only one who gets to control the story. Ending the call, I set my phone down, my gaze drifting toward the empty street beyond the diner's window. Jennifer thought she had one. She had no idea what was coming. The night stretched on endlessly, the flickering neon sign outside humming like a trapped insect in my head. My coffee sat untouched, growing cold as my fingers traced absent-minded patterns on the table. My mind spun, replaying every step, every choice that had led me to this moment. Jennifer wasn't just gone, she had rewritten our history. And in her version, I was the villain. I scrolled through her post again, reading the carefully selected words that twisted the truth into something unrecognizable. The responses from her friends, our mutual acquaintances, even members of my own family were clear as day. You did the right thing, Jennifer. If he made you feel unsafe, then leaving was the best choice. We always had a feeling something was off about him. You deserve happiness. Call me if you need anything, girl. I should have expected this. I should have known that she wouldn't just walk away quietly. No, Jennifer needed to control the narrative, to cast herself as the wounded soul escaping an unbearable situation. And in her story, I had become the monster. A part of me wanted to go online and set the record straight, to lay everything out in the open. The late-night messages she assumed I never saw, the lies about where she was going, the careful deception that had led her straight into another man's arms. But what would that achieve? It would make me look desperate. Worse, it would make me look like I still cared. I lifted my coffee cup and drained the last of it, the bitterness settling on my tongue. No, I wouldn't play her game. If she wanted to tell a story, I would tell my own. And mine would be the truth. Pulling out my phone, I hesitated only briefly before typing out a message. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't defensive. Just the facts. Jennifer and I are no longer together. I wish her the best in whatever path she's chosen, and I hope she finds what she was looking for. As for me, I'll be moving forward. That's all I have to say on the matter. I hit post. Within seconds, the notifications started rolling in. Shock, confusion, some people even questioning her version of events. Others probed for more details, asking me what really happened. But I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth had a way of surfacing, even when people tried to bury it. The bell above the diner's door chimed, snapping me out of my thoughts. I expected another trucker or late-night wanderer, but when I glanced up, I saw someone I hadn't anticipated. Christopher. Christopher had been my best friend since college, the kind of friend who never sugar-coated things, who always told me the blunt truth whether I wanted to hear it or not. He had been the first to warn me about Jennifer, cautioning me that she always found a way to land on top, regardless of who she trampled along the way. I hadn't listened, and now, here I was, facing the consequences of my own ignorance. Sliding into the booth across from me, his expression unreadable, Christopher shook his head and let out a low sigh. "Man," he muttered at last, his tone heavy. "I saw her post." I exhaled slowly, nodding. "Of course you did." He studied me for a long moment before leaning in, his eyes sharp. "So, what's the plan?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Plan?" A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Come on, James. You're not seriously going to let her walk away from this without consequence, are you?" I should have expected that from him. Christopher had always been the type to believe in settling scores, not with words, but with action. He wasn't necessarily wrong, but I wasn't sure retaliation would change anything. "She already got what she wanted," I murmured, dragging a hand over my face. "She turned me into the villain in her story. And now, she's off with," I trailed off, shaking my head. "Doesn't matter." Christopher's expression darkened. "You don't even know who he is, do you?" A strange tension coiled in my stomach. "What?" He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "She didn't leave you for just anyone. I know exactly who he is." My pulse quickened. For weeks, I had speculated, doubted, but never confirmed. And now, the answer sat right in front of me, waiting to be spoken aloud. "Who?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Christopher hesitated for the briefest moment before saying the name. And the instant he did, the world around me seemed to still. The air in the diner turned heavy, as if the weight of his words pressed down on my chest. My hands curled around the edge of the table, my knuckles whitening from the force of my grip. Because the name he said? It wasn't someone unfamiliar. It wasn't a stranger Jennifer had met by chance. No, it was someone I had trusted. Someone I had welcomed into my life, my home. Someone who had smiled at me while secretly dismantling everything I had built. A slow, simmering burn ignited deep inside me. Not just anger, but a raw, searing betrayal that gnawed at the foundation of everything I thought I knew. Christopher watched me carefully. "Now you understand why you can't just let this slide." I let out a sharp breath, the weight of the truth sinking in like an impending storm. Jennifer hadn't simply walked away. She had set fire to my life and left me in the ashes. But she wasn't the only one responsible. And if she believed I would just sit back and accept it, she had no idea what was coming. The sounds of the diner, the chatter, the clinking dishes, the hum of the lights, faded into nothing. The moment Christopher said his name, everything else ceased to exist. I sat frozen, caught between shock and fury, my breath shallow. My fingers clenched into a fist against the table, nails pressing so hard into my palm that I thought they might break the skin. I had prepared myself to hear the name of a stranger, an unknown man who had swooped in and taken Jennifer away. But it wasn't a stranger. It was Lucas. Lucas, my friend, my coworker, the man who had been there at my wedding, raising a glass in a toast to love and happiness. The same man who had stood by my side through some of my darkest days, who had been in my home, laughing over beers, cracking jokes at work events, someone I had trusted like family. And all along, he had been waiting, plotting, smiling to my face while slipping into my wife's bed behind my back. I inhaled slowly, my breath shaking. "Tell me you're joking," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Christopher's expression didn't waver. His eyes were dark, serious. "I wouldn't joke about this. I've had my suspicions for months, but I didn't have proof, not until now." My mind felt like it was spiraling, sinking beneath waves of emotions too fast to process. I had spent weeks convincing myself that I was imagining things, that Jennifer's distance was due to work, stress, boredom. But she hadn't been distant. She had been lying, and she hadn't done it alone. I thought back to every conversation I had shared with Lucas, every moment I had confided in him about my worries, my fears that something was off. Had he been laughing at me behind my back? Had he already been with her while pretending to give me advice on how to fix my marriage? The thought made my stomach churn. Christopher leaned in, his voice low but firm. "I know where they are right now." My head snapped up, my entire body going rigid. Where? He hesitated briefly before pulling out his phone and sliding it across the table. I looked down. An address flashed on the screen. Not a hotel. Not a bar. Lucas's apartment. A bitter laugh escaped me as I shook my head. She didn't even try to hide it, did she? Christopher sighed. She thinks you're done. That you're just going to sit back and take it. He paused, then met my gaze. Are you? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Every fiber of my being urged me to strike back. To march up to Lucas's door, hammer my fist against it, and ensure he felt the weight of what he had done. To shatter Jennifer's carefully constructed illusion and force her to see that she couldn't simply rewrite history to cast herself as the victim. But was that really who I wanted to be? A betrayed husband consumed by rage? A man so defined by his fury that he lost himself? Jennifer had already stripped so much from me. My dignity, my trust, my peace of mind. Would I allow her to take my self-control too? I inhaled deeply, my fingers curling around the table's edge as I forced myself to think rather than react. Christopher studied me carefully, his voice steady when he finally spoke. Whatever you decide, I've got your back. But there's something else you should know. I lifted my gaze. What is it? He hesitated, then finally said, Jennifer isn't just with Lucas. She's moving in with him. The words hit harder than I expected. I should have seen this coming. The suitcase she packed, the way she left without hesitation, it all made sense now. This wasn't a moment of uncertainty for her. She hadn't walked away to figure things out. She had been planning this for months. Every cold shoulder, every dismissive glance, every moment she made me feel like an obstacle rather than a partner. It had all been leading to this. And just like that, I knew what I had to do. I didn't need revenge. I needed to erase her. Not in the way she might have imagined. Not with desperate pleas or reckless fights. No, I would ensure Jennifer regretted every choice she had made. I stood, sliding Christopher's phone back toward him. Let's go. Christopher blinked in confusion. Go where? I tossed a few bills onto the table for the coffee I hadn't even touched. Home, I said simply. I have work to do. Christopher frowned. James, I know you're angry, but don't do anything you'll regret. A small, sharp smile crossed my face. Don't worry, I assured him. I'm not going to them. I'm getting rid of her. Christopher eyed me warily, but followed as I strode toward the exit. The night air was crisp, the distant hum of traffic filling the silence between us as we climbed into my car. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I wasn't even bitter. What settled inside me was something unexpected, clarity. Jennifer had made her decision, and now it was my turn. I turned to Christopher. This isn't about revenge, I said at last. It's about closure. He raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan on getting that? I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the steering wheel. By making sure she understands that I'm moving on, that she has no power over me anymore. Christopher nodded, waiting for me to elaborate. I've already cut our financial ties. The house, the bills, the credit cards, everything that was once shared is now solely mine. She wanted a fresh start, so I'm just making sure she gets exactly that. Christopher smirked. That's smart. I scrolled through my phone, glancing at old messages. She probably expects me to chase after her, to beg her to come back or lash out in some dramatic way. But I won't. Then what's your plan? Christopher asked. I smirked. I'm just going to let her live the life she chose. No interference. No arguments. Just distance. Christopher chuckled. You really think that'll get to her more than a confrontation? I shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. But that's not my problem anymore. The driveway felt different when I pulled up. The house, once a shared space, now stood as a blank slate, ready for something new. Christopher followed me inside, his gaze sweeping over the empty spaces, her half of the closet, the missing items on the shelves. But there was no sense of loss, only possibility. So what now? Christopher asked. I let out a breath. I don't know yet, I admitted. But for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to finding out. The morning light filtered through the windows, filling the house with warmth. For once, I woke without a weight on my chest, without the lingering tension of waiting for the inevitable betrayal. No more guessing, no more worrying. I rose from bed, brewed a cup of coffee, and let the silence settle around me, not as something heavy, but as something peaceful. Then, a car pulled into the driveway. I didn't need to look. I already knew who it was. Right on time. Jennifer stepped out, dressed as if she were heading to a business meeting rather than picking up her things. Even now, she had to maintain control. I opened the door before she could knock. "Morning," I greeted her casually. She crossed her arms. "You didn't have to throw my things into trash bags." I smirked. "I figured it was easier than packing them up for you." She exhaled sharply, her gaze flicking to the bags by the door. "Are you really not even going to help me load them?" I leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "I think you've got everything covered." Jennifer studied me, her eyes searching for something. Anger, regret, maybe even hesitation, but I gave her nothing. "So you're really just letting me go?" she murmured. I nodded, my voice steady. "You made that choice, Jennifer. I'm just following through." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. She hesitated, as if there was something left to say, but in the end, she remained silent. Instead, she reached for her bags, loaded them into her car, and turned back for one last look. "I hope you find whatever it is you're searching for, James," she said softly. I met her gaze without wavering. "I already have." She lingered for a moment, maybe expecting me to say more, but I didn't. With a final glance, she got into the car, backed out of the driveway, and disappeared down the street. I stood there for a moment, inhaling the crisp morning air. And then, at last, I shut the door. For the first time in years, I was free. The house was mine again, but it didn't feel the same. It felt lighter, more open, no tension hanging in the air, no forced conversations, no waiting for someone who had already been gone long before she physically left. I walked into the living room and took it all in. For years, this space had been filled with us, or at least, the version of us I had believed in. Now it was just me, and somehow, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like relief. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside again, taking another deep breath. The weight I had been carrying for so long, months, maybe even years, was finally lifting. I didn't feel bitter. I wasn't broken. I was simply done. And being done meant I was free. I got into my car. Not because I had somewhere I needed to be, but because I could. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't bound by anyone else's plans, anyone else's expectations. The road stretched out in front of me, open and limitless, and in that moment, I understood something. I could go anywhere, do anything, become whoever I wanted to be. So I drove, not to escape the past, but to embrace what was ahead. A fresh start, a life that was finally, truly, my own. And for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected. Excitement for what came next.